Welcome to our final Author Happy Hour, brought to you by the Kentucky Book Festival, a program of Kentucky Humanities. I'm Sarah Woods, the director of the Kentucky Book Festival, and I'm so glad you've joined us this evening. Our virtual book festival will continue in November, the 9th through the 14th, featuring such authors as John Grisham, Nikki Finney, and many more. You can find more information and register for programs at kyhumanities.org and follow us at kyhumanities on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook for updates and announcements. If you're joining on Zoom and have questions as we move through the program this evening, please put those in the Q&A box and we will address them at the end of the session. We have 4 special guests with us tonight, so grab your beverage of choice and get ready to learn about writing the perfect crime. Rea Frey is an award-winning author of several nonfiction books and 3 novels, and is the founder and CEO of Write Way, which teaches writers about the business of writing, not just the craft. Journalist and mystery writer Andrew Welsh-Huggins is the author of 6 mysteries featuring Andy Hayes, a former Ohio State and Cleveland Browns quarterback turned private eye. He is also the editor of Columbus Noir, a short story collection. Dana Ridenour is the award-winning author of the Lexi Montgomery FBI series. She is a retired FBI agent who spent most of her career as an FBI undercover operative. Born and raised in Kentucky, she now lives in South Carolina, but still cheers for her beloved Wildcats. And our moderator for this evening, David Bell, is a USA Today best-selling author of 10 novels. His work has been translated into numerous foreign languages, and in 2013, he won the prestigious Prix Polar International de Cognac for Best Crime Novel by an International Author. And I hope I didn't butcher that title. He is a professor of English at Western Kentucky University. Thank you all so much for being here with us tonight. David, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sarah. And thanks to everybody who's joining. Cheers, since it is happy hour.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers to all of you. I'm really honored to be part of this panel with authors who I certainly respect and admire, and a couple who I've met over the years. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you all think. And obviously, if you're out there listening and you have questions about anything, about the business of writing, about the craft of writing, anything like that, fire away. We've got your undivided attention, so let us know your questions and we'll be happy to talk about them. But I just wanted to start by getting everyone to just weigh in on this and just, why do you write these kinds of stories? Mystery stories, thrillers, crime stories. We go to these events and people always want to ask us that question. Why do you write these kinds of stories? And what they really mean is, why are you so freaking weird that you write these stories? But seriously, as you look back, like, why do you think you write these kinds of stories?
Who wants to start? I'll start. I mean, I probably write these stories so I don't get arrested in real life, but I don't know. I like writing about things that everyday normal people fear and that we all kind of collectively think about. I always have like a mother-child theme, kidnapping, things that basically scare parents to death. I like to kind of live out my own fears through them. But I think there's just a curiosity in the darkness that a lot of people are interested in.
Okay, well, I'll go next. I guess it's probably pretty obvious with me. I was an FBI agent for 21 years, so during that time, I spent most of my life, my career as an undercover operative. So it was kind of a natural transition to write an undercover series. And I have a female protagonist who's the FBI agent. And my books came from the journals that I kept as an undercover agent. I kept them hidden in the ceiling panels of my apartment complex. So the thoughts, the feelings, the emotions, everything that my undercover agent has and feels in the books came straight out of the journals. So that's, I guess, why I write mysteries and thrillers.
I'd give two main reasons. I got the mystery bug early when I climbed up the shelves when I was 8, and I pulled my mom's Earl Stanley Gardner, Perry Mason paperbacks off the shelf and started reading those. Didn't understand a lot, but I just started to appreciate the intricacies of mystery. And then, as a journalist, my first full-time job, not surprising in reporting, was as a police reporter for a small paper in Indiana. And that was a very eye-opening experience, but I also found that, I was okay at it. I didn't mind a lot of the unfortunate things you saw as a police reporter. And I liked what I saw. And I think I sort of realized at that point there was something about criminal justice, crime, mysteries that made sense for me to do. And that's pretty much the only thing I've really ever wanted to write, really either fiction or nonfiction.
What about you, David?
Well, I blame my parents. Like I blame them for everything. The older I get, the less I can blame them for. But no, my dad read a lot of popular fiction, so there were always, spy novels and mystery novels in the house. And my mom was really fascinated by true crime stories. Like if there was some weird, true crime story on the news or like some documentary or whatever, she'd want to watch it. And then of course, these were back in the days when there was like one TV in the house and your parents controlled what was on TV. So I kind of ended up watching that stuff with my mom a lot. So it was just kind of there. But that also leads to my next thought and my next question, which is, do you feel like you chose the genre you write in? Did you choose to write mysteries and thrillers, or did the genre choose you, right? Like if somebody said like, oh, I want to write mysteries and thrillers, do you have to be oriented a certain way as a person to want to write these kinds of darker stories? Or like, could anybody just say, hey, I want to write a thriller, I want to write a dark suspense novel or whatever?
I mean, I didn't even know domestic suspense was a genre when I wrote my debut, Not Her Daughter. I wasn't thinking about a genre specifically, even though, again, I didn't mention it, but I also love true crime. I was a journalist. I worked with a lot of death row inmates, and I've always been kind of interested in that. But I just had this story grab hold of me, and it kind of bordered suspense, mystery, thriller, but I didn't know what category necessarily to put it into until my editor was like, oh, this is domestic suspense. And I'm like, yeah, sure, I know what that is. I didn't even know that genre existed, but I feel like a lot of writers set out to write mysteries and thrillers, but my genre kind of just found me and I fell into it.
Yeah, I didn't know what domestic suspense was either until one day my editor said, oh, well, since this is domestic suspense, and I was just like, yeah, whatever that is. I thought I was writing a thriller, but there are all these weird subcategories that, so, yeah.
I would say I started as, even though I always had this mystery bug, like a lot of people, I got out of college and started writing what might charitably be called literary fiction. And because of my liberal arts education, even though in my spare time, I love to read mysteries. I thought that kind of what's called literary fiction was more what I wanted to do. But I guess I just felt the tug really strongly. And when I realized I was ready to really start writing something that I really wanted to write, it was pretty clear it was going to be mystery, and even more specifically, it was clear it was going to be a private eye series, because that's a genre I've always liked. And I don't like this distinctions we make between literary fiction and mystery and romance fiction. I mean, there's good and bad writing in all genres, and I hope we're all looking at it that way.
Well, I think when I was writing my debut novel, I wasn't thinking genre at the time either. I think I was writing it for therapy more than anything. I was putting words on paper because I had spent so many years in the undercover program that I really needed to get it out. And so I was just writing for therapy, it's all it boiled down to. And then when the story came out and was fully formed, the first readers of it were like, oh, this is great, you need to publish. But the second and third book, I just, at that point, I was addicted. And I love writing in the thriller genre now, just because that was my background. But I am branching out a little bit. The book I'm working on now is women's fiction. So I'm looking forward to changing genres and just shaking it up a little bit. But I do enjoy writing in the thriller genre. It's a lot of fun.
Dana, how soon after you retired, I guess, did you like feel the need to start writing? Was it right away, or did you need a little bit of a rest, I guess?
Well, I was writing my first book the last couple of years. I was working just on spare time. And I was crazy enough to retire from the FBI and launch my first book the very next day, which, of course, now I look back and that was crazy. I didn't build a platform. I didn't know what a platform was. I was just, it was just crazy. I should have taken a year and promoted the book and built my platforms and done it properly. But I was excited to get the book out there. So I retired one day, and the very next day I launched the book and went on a book tour.
Nice. Yeah, let's live and learn. That's great.
It is. It was live and learn.
Because Stephen King, like when people ask Stephen King, like, why do you write the books you write? Why do you write horror? He always says, what makes you think I have a choice? And it's kind of just like, we're oriented to look at the world a certain way, you know, and like if, you know, if we see something, we kind of think like, even if it's something happy, you're like, oh, you know, I wonder if that person's contemplating a murder. So it's kind of just like we're oriented a certain way in the world. And I've always just been fascinated. I remember when I was a kid and, you know, the news would be on and, you know, as soon as they started talking about like I grew up in a big city in Cincinnati. And so it's like, as soon as it was like, they're talking about a murder or something, like my ears perked up. And of course, then I'd be too afraid to sleep in my room without the light on and everything. I'd be terrified, but I was also fascinated by it. So it's kind of like, are we just hardwired to look at things a certain way and see the murder part of it or the crime part of it, you know?
Yeah, I think it's, I do think it's kind of thrust upon us. I mean, I lean towards listening to true crime podcasts and watching, you know, slightly darker police procedural stuff on TV. And I sometimes worry about myself because I do when we used to go to restaurants, I used to enter restaurants and I would always play a game with the table I was sitting at. Okay, who's the victim and who's the killer? And let's figure this out.
And that's why people don't go to restaurants anymore because
God. Yeah, this year in particular has been terrible for all the ideas coming in quarantine. But sometimes I wonder, because I talk about these stories. Sometimes I'll seek out, you know, news stories and just different ideas. And I have an 8-year-old daughter, and I mean, we'll go on hikes and she'll want me to troubleshoot my book out loud. And so I mean, she's like involved. And like, oh, I wonder if this happened. And she always puts in like robots and changes it to science fiction. But I'm like, am I messing up this child by even talking about some of these things? But even at her age, she's also interested in some of these scenarios, even if they scare her. So I think the psychology of that and just, again, the interest that we all seem to have. Look at the shows, you know, the new shows that come out and how dark they are. And again, like I just feel like the world keeps getting kind of darker and darker in terms of what we watch, what we read, what we consume.
I do think you should put robots in your books. I was meaning.
Yeah, I'll just take it to but no, then I won't be in my genre. And
so on that notion of genre, because we kind of talked about that a little bit, and I think what Andrew said, and you know, I'm sure we all agree, this idea that these genre categories, you know, I don't know, they're kind of silly sometimes, but we've probably all had the experience. I'm not talking from any personal experience or anything, right? Is that once you write a book and it gets published and it gets put in a certain category, then your publisher wants you to continue to do that. They want you to be a brand. They want to know, like, if someone walks into a bookstore and they pick up a book with your name on it, they're going to get a certain thing, right? And so I'm just wondering, when we get put in those categories, and if you continue to write over and over again in that category, how do you manage to keep that fresh when, you know, there are only so many ways you can kill people, there are only so many reasons people get killed. So like, how do you continue to keep it fresh as you go on and write book after book after book?
Well, I had 21 years of cases, so I'm kind of drawing from all of those.
You're set.
All the material.
Yeah.
I used I kind of tried to stretch myself with this third book, and I made my protagonist vision impaired. So she's almost completely blind. And, again, like, I think plot, of course, is very important, but I wanted to play around with taking sight away as a writer, which was not a very smart decision. When I went to sit down, I'm like, oh, I've got to create a world, and, this protagonist can't see it. But I do think, especially in the thriller, mystery, suspense genre, it is getting so saturated, and readers, what used to work maybe a few years ago, readers don't necessarily respond to. And not that you have to write specifically for your readers, but I think, that's part of the tough thing, is just always trying to figure out ways to keep it fresh.
Well, changing technology too. I mean, in our genre, so much has changed with just DNA and computers and tracking and facial recognition just since we all started writing. And it changes daily. That's a big problem sometimes with this genre.
Yeah.
That's why I want to start writing historical story, because there's no technology. It's like how do you make somebody disappear now when there are cell phones and everybody's being tracked? It's like, you got to figure out a way to get people to disappear when, everybody can be found. So like, I want to start writing stuff set in like the 1300s. So like,
no fact checking.
All you had to worry about was the plague. Oh, wait, that's too on the.
David, have you thought about branching out into another genre ever, or you staying where you are forever?
No, I certainly think about it. My first two books that I wrote with a small press were horror. And then I wrote suspense as I went to a New York publisher. So yeah, I think we all probably have millions of ideas flying around. If we all love to read, so we're always probably like reading something great and then thinking like, oh, I'd love to write this or that. And the other thing is just like when I read a book that I really like, even if it's in a very different genre, I think like, oh, how did they do that? Could I do that, right? Could I put robots in my book? Could I do whatever? But they all, I think all genres have, unique challenges and skills that people have to bring to the table. So it's tough. I think it's tough to branch out and to get a publisher to go along with that, or to find a new publisher, or whatever you'd have to do.
Yeah.
One thing that I tend to do is I do write a lot of short fiction, and that often helps me, especially when I'm between books. And oftentimes before I dig into something bigger, I will purposely take the time to write a short story or two. And I don't know, it helps me. It's obviously a completely different form. Every word truly does count. I love writing submissions where there's an actual word count. Like if you go over this, we will just throw your story away. I like the discipline of having to follow that, and that kind of energizes me a little bit before I have to dig into something bigger. It kind of changes it up. I write a private eye series, first person. So a lot of times those short stories are not first person, they're third person. They could have different gender protagonists. I like kind of mixing it up. It helps a little brain relief.
Yeah, I have a question. So I run a business for writers who want to get published. So all day long, I'm creating nonfiction book proposals for clients. We have a fiction department, so we do a lot of developmental editing. So creatively, like pumping out, work for our clients all day long. So my writing time is always very condensed, not as much as I want it to be. But with all of you, because I feel like you all probably spend more time in this, but do you feel, how they say like, oh, you need to spend 80% of your time writing, 20% marketing. But in this day and age, does anyone feel like it's flip-flopped and they spend so much of their time figuring out how to market their books and less time on the writing? Or is that just a pressure that I feel because I'm so strapped for time?
It's just you.
It's just me. All right, great, perfect.
No, I do think there's a lot of pressure that I always tell, like if we're at conferences like that, or if I'm just like this, or I'm talking to my students, I always say the first question they're going to ask you when you get a book deal is they're going to say, do you have a website? Are you on Twitter? Are you on this? Are you on that? It's just kind of become part of it. It's challenging just because on the one hand, it's an opportunity to feel connected to people. I mean, especially now, but I mean, even before the pandemic, it was an opportunity to feel connected to people. But at the same time, it can be such a distraction. It can be such a thing where you are, comparing yourself to other people. And so it's a double-edged sword, all the online and managing the different platforms and everything. I'm with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's easy to go down the rabbit hole. You get on there to do a little bit of marketing for promoting, and the next thing you know, 3 hours has passed. And
crazy.
Yeah, I go down that rabbit hole all the time, and then I'm mad at myself.
I'm trying to figure out how to market for both my authors and myself without social media, like moving beyond, because I do feel at some point it's going to change or implode, or we're going to have to move beyond that. At least fingers crossed, I'm hoping we do one day. But it's funny that, writers are now expected to be so many other things. And I feel like there's less time for the deep, deep work that, has to happen, especially if you're on a book a year trajectory, which a lot of people are, and you have less and less time to write.
Yeah. I mean, I have basically 2 hours a morning. I'm still a full-time reporter, so everything I do happens. I'm an early morning person, so 2 hours before work, and I have to craft everything. That's content creation, so actually working on that book or that short story, but that's also trying to update my website. Exactly what you're talking about. Stay on top of my work, my personal email. I do put out a newsletter about every 6 weeks, which I really enjoy doing. And, it's not social media. It's more,
I love the newsletter. Yeah.
I'm a big proponent of newsletters as a way to brand yourself without all the weird stuff that happens with social media. But I agree. I mean, I wish I could spend 2 hours every morning just working on the content, but nowadays it's impossible. I mean, you have to work on the other stuff.
Exactly. It's kind of insane.
So I'm kind of wondering, so that's a complaint we all have, right?
Sorry.
We all agree on that. And right now there are a bunch of people in publishing listening to us.
I know, right? Sorry.
Because they care what we think. But no, I guess I'm kind of wondering, this is somewhat related, I guess. So looking at like mystery thriller as a genre and as a world, right? I mean, is there something about that world, of the mystery thriller world or the genre, that you would like to see change? I mean, or that you would hope would be changing or evolving in some ways, or something you would like to see it be doing differently? The books, the authors, the whatever. I mean, is there like something you're looking to see us all doing differently, or do you see like the genre going in some direction that it hasn't been going in?
So this is pretty low-hanging fruit, but I think between the Me Too movement and the Black Lives Matter movement, I mean, there's a huge conversation going on among crime writers right now about how we have portrayed situations, victims as well. I mean, there's actually an entire book contest where the victim cannot be a woman, and I think that's a really positive trend. It's both diversifying the characters in our books, but also just rethinking those situations and rethinking what police officers do in the name of justice. Rethinking why we have 5 dead women in every serial killer book, and I don't think it's watering the genre down. I really think this is a way to enliven it and just bring a lot more voices in, make it smarter, and hopefully, I guess more realistic, but also widen the net for readers.
I'd love to see more voices and more people represented in our genre. I mean, I was did a podcast on this, like in the thriller genre, particularly, I feel like it's just a lot of white people, I mean, which is fine. But I think we have to open genres specifically to all sorts of voices and all sorts of stories. I mean, exactly what Andrew was just saying, but I think that could be such a positive trend that I'd love to see happen. Yeah,
I agree. I think we've seen so many just white female victims and white male, protagonists, and it's time for a little bit of diversity. And I think we could probably get a whole different generation of readers if we branched out a little bit between that and technology.
I mean, I suspect that this is just me observing, from the outside. It seems like the young adult world has reckoned with this a little sooner. But I suspect that this is something publishing as a whole is reckoning with that idea of diversity right now. I think it was just in the New York Times. I'm just dropping the New York Times in the conversation, so I sound smart, by the way. But no, I think like the New York Times, it was the New York Times or the Washington Post, just had an article about diversity in publishing, hiring more editors and executives who are diverse and starting imprints that focus on diverse voices. So I do think that's probably a direction that it's going. I'm wondering about like books, just also books in particular, because like it seems like, when Gone Girl came out, there was like this whole like unreliable narrator thing, and that became the thing, and like telling stories out of order and different timelines and all that. I mean, do you think that stuff is going to stick around? Do you think people are kind of like, hey, I just want a more straightforward story. I don't necessarily need the unreliable narrator kind of thing going on, or is that going to be here to stay? I don't know.
I think people are a little bit tired of the unreliable narrator. But yeah, that's a great question to see. Because what's the trend right now? Like, I read in this genre a ton, again, more like suspense than straight up, thriller or mystery, but I don't know. I haven't seen kind of a common thread or theme lately. Has anyone else noticed anything that's like, oh, this is the trend or the gimmick, or anything that's kind of leading?
Dead people and murder is the trend. No, I don't know. I mean, I'm just thinking like unreliable narrator was kind of like the big. Yeah. So I'm just wondering if like we're. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the big thing would be next. Maybe it will be the diverse voices. I don't know. But yeah, I don't know.
The thing with the unreliable narrator is that became, it's like that suddenly was a genre by itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I mean, there's any good mystery for the past, I hope, 150 years has always had unreliable characters. I mean, that's like the heart of what we try to do, is that you're not sure you can exactly trust this character and then the next character and that person, there's something weird about them. Why is that they're weird? Are they hiding something, or is that the guilty person, or are they unreliable for another reason? So I think what was so interesting about that trend is that it became so hot because of Gone Girl and The Girl on the Train that suddenly everybody had to write that, and that's how you pitched it. Oh, this is an unreliable narrator novel. And I think that kind of marketing I think that's a little bit unfortunate, because it may rule out books that are really good, but for different reasons.
Sure.
And so on that note, I was just thinking, before we get to all the questions that will come in, I want you to each be able to give a plug for like, what's your latest book or whatever. But I was thinking about this before we all started talking. Sometimes there are genres that go in and out of style, like something like horror will be hot and then it'll go away. And, so you see kind of genres going in and out. It seems like the mystery crime story is just always there. There are always lots and lots of mystery books, and a lot of them are bestsellers, movies, TV shows, true crime. It seems like the mystery story, just as a big umbrella category, just kind of like keeps rocking on and on. And why do you think it is that that genre seems to not fit? I mean, we get the little subgenres like, you know, domestic suspense, unreliable narrator, whatever, but like that genre keeps rocking on writ large. So like, why do you think it is that that one keeps going in the way it keeps going?
I think people like to solve crimes. I think people like to put themselves in those shoes without actually being in those shoes. I don't know. Again, that curiosity. I mean, I don't think that'll ever go out of style. I don't think it's ever gone out of style. I mean, again, Dana, you probably know this better than anyone, being an FBI agent, but I mean, why do you think?
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I remember when I was 8 years old, my father was a police officer, and I would sneak and get into his files and try to solve his cases. Because I was just so fascinated by crime. And of course, my mother was just mortified because there were grisly pictures and everything like that. But
Gosh.
you know,
Oh,
I know. So I guess I was into the genre way sooner than I probably should have ever been. But I always read the books that scared me. I remember reading Helter Skelter when I was too young to read Helter Skelter. It scared me to death. But my mother never told me I couldn't read a book. She recommended sometimes that I didn't, but she never took any books away from me. So I've always read the genre, and I've always read stuff that scared me. And I think deep down, we all kind of like to be scared a little bit. I mean,
completely.
it's kind of dark, but I think it's true.
We just watched, I'd never seen the original Halloween, and my husband and I were like, let's watch Halloween. And it was amazing to see the slow burn of that movie and how nothing much actually really happened. There was just this level of anticipation. And then you see all these horror movies now, and it's just constant action and gore and violence. And I think there's something that's really been lost a little bit about the subtlety, which I think can be the most frightening, is that just subtle anticipation of something bad happening and not necessarily some big gory surprise, which I love. I love books like that as well. So
yeah, I'm like you. I love the psychological,
the best
kind of thrillers better than I don't have to have something blowing up every 2 or 3 minutes. I'd rather it's the slow burn because it is more interesting.
Exactly.
I would also add to what Rea said that things have, life just seems more and more stressful. Now, I'm not talking the past 8 months, but things are just speeding up with the internet and all that. And I think the ability to pick up a book where there's conflict, but then most importantly, where there's resolution, where the world is brought back to the way it should be. I just think there's a big appeal, huge appeal for that now. And that would be my 2 cents on why, especially the mystery genre continues, that it offers escapism, but in the most basic human sense. It's a chance to put the world that's broken up back together again.
And because of the subgenres, I mean, if you don't want the grisly, then you can read the cozy mysteries. Mm-hmm. And I know a lot of ladies that just love the cozy mysteries because they don't want the blood and the guts, but they still want to solve that mystery. They want to be in that the shoes of the detective or the PI.
Yeah, I'm sure there are people who study these things, right? But it's always would be interesting to think how the popularity of certain books is affected by what's going on in the world around it, right? And also, like, when there have been times in history when crime was out of control or perceived to be out of control, do people want to read books that are mysteries or whatever? It's the same thing with the pandemic. I mean, this is a conversation that I've had with some author friends. Is just like, would someone want to read a book about a pandemic right now, or are we all sick of it? And then I guess a further point, I'd actually be interested to know what you all think. Like, so writing books going forward, are you going to reference the pandemic? It's kind of like if you were writing a book set in like 1948, would you pretend like World War II had never happened, or would you refer to, oh, when the war was going on? And it's kind of like, I mean, I guess the war, you knew when it was ending, right? But same kind of thing now, like, will you incorporate the pandemic into your books, or will you have characters pretend like this isn't happening? You know, I don't know. It's just an interesting thing, I think, for writers to think about. How do you deal with that kind of stuff?
So funny. I have my next book's coming out not until 2022, and it's already written and done and turned in. I mean, there's zero reference of it, but I think that's okay. I think, you know, some people pick up books to escape everything that's going on. And, you know, I think either way is fine. I do know a couple of people who've written books about being in quarantine and again, pandemics. And I don't know, I think there's just a real fatigue with all of that. Like we were so excited This Is Us came back on TV and debuted, and they all in the masks, and they picked up right where quarantine left off. And I was like, no, I just want to not pretend, but just have a moment in the day where you're not confronted with what's going on in the world. But that's just me.
Yeah, sure.
Now, I think, David, the analogy of World War II is a pretty good one. I mean, there's a difference between deciding like write a book set in the pandemic and like, yeah, Ray, my next book's coming out in June. And I mean, I don't think there's a single reference to it. It just sort of happens in regular time. But I also think that a book 3 or 4 years down the road, there's no reason it couldn't make a reference to,
Sure.
You know, I was in my house, you know, it was during the pandemic and blah, blah, blah. I mean, just like, it'd be the same thing as though you were saying I got a letter from my son who was serving in the Pacific. You know, just, we can't, I don't think we can ignore the pandemic as a historical event going forward, but writing an entire book about it right now, I think that would be, I'm not sure I'd be up for that.
Mm-mm.
I wouldn't either.
Mm.
I can see referencing it, but I don't think I would want to read a book about the pandemic right now, and I definitely wouldn't want to write a book completely about a pandemic. I'm done with the pandemic. I'm so tired of it.
Yes. Moving on.
I thought of it because, you know, so like my next book, which is coming out in the summer, I started writing it I mean, I thought of the idea before the pandemic happened. And then it was like, as the pandemic was happening, I was starting to write it. And then I talked to another writer who was in the same boat, had a book coming out. And she was like, well, you know, I managed to work it in a little bit. And I was thinking like, oh, should I be working it in? Because the book will come out and people like, you know, I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer to it. I was just curious, like, how does this affect going forward? You know, this is now, and it wasn't just like something that happened in one part of the country. It happened worldwide. So you kind of have to address it in some way. But I think what you're all saying is true, is like, there's pandemic fatigue. Who wants to read a book about the pandemic or whatever, right? So yeah, I see someone named Sarah Woods is back. And I assume, yes, you have questions from the studio audience?
Yes, we do have some questions.
Okay.
And it's funny, touching on the pandemic question, when it first kind of hit the US really hard, I noticed the books about the 1918 flu were flying off the shelves, and then the plague and such, those books were selling like crazy, but not so much anymore. I think it's because people thought it was going to be a short-lived affair, and here we are. So anyway, here are some questions. One of our viewers says, I'd like to know how you imagined and came up with the central character of the detective. So this is for those of you who are kind of writing a detective or a private eye sort of novel. How'd you come up with your main character? Dana, this might be, is it based on you?
Well, my character is definitely based on the cases that I worked. It's fictionalized, but they're based on real cases and real people and real characters that I experienced throughout my career. And they came directly from my journals. So my main character, Alexa Montgomery, is definitely based on me and maybe an alter ego of me.
Cool. Andrew, what about you?
Well, I always knew I wanted to write a private eye series. So my main challenge was I'm going to have a private eye. He's going to live in Columbus. What should his sort of shtick be? And you probably have never heard of it. There's a little football team up here called the Ohio State Buckeyes. And it's, since I'm not a native Columbus or Ohioan, I can kind of look at it with a little bit of, I'm not a huge passionate fan, but I realized that the perfect backstory for my character would be somebody who had been a fantastic, beloved Ohio State player and then basically blew it all, which is what my character did. And so that's kind of how I came up with my character. Essentially, he's an ex quarterback, but he's also kind of an ex fallen angel, and he spends a lot of his time trying to, when he's not solving mysteries, he's trying to clean up the mess he made of his personal life.
Okay. Well, speaking of your most recent books, I don't think each of y'all had enough time yet to really tell us just briefly, what is your most recent book about? I mean, we have the info up on the website, but it's way more fun to hear your inside scoop. So if you have your copy with you, hold it up and show us. But please tell us a little bit about your most recent books. Oh, Rhea's got hers.
I have them too. See, it's double. There you go.
Aw, nice.
Like Vanna White.
There you go. Okay, I'll start. So my book, which came out in August, launching in a pandemic, don't ever recommend doing that. But Until I Find You is about a blind widow, Rebecca Gray, who believes that her 3-month-old son, baby Jackson, has been swapped for another baby, and no one in her community will believe her. The police don't believe her. Her friends don't believe her. So the entire book is the readers kind of led down this path of, do they trust Rebecca? Is she just mistaken? Or did something actually happen to her baby? Did her child get swapped? So it was pretty fun to write.
Okay, I guess I could go second. Below the Radar, this is my last book, my one that just came out. And basically it continues with my character, Alexi Montgomery. This is her third undercover mission. This time she's going overseas. So she's going to the Netherlands, and she's been assigned a male FBI partner, and she's never worked with a partner before. So she's not completely sure of his motives on why he's been assigned to work with her, because this is not his wheelhouse. And so she has her suspicions about him. So she goes overseas to try to help the Dutch police find a missing undercover operative that has fallen into the extremist group. And that's Lexi's area of specialties, is working the extremist organization. Plus there's an American in the middle of it. And she's going over to try to find out what the American, if he's over there to make plans for an attack on U.S. soil, as well as try to find find the Dutch operative. So that's this one. And it is loosely based on a case that I worked. I traveled to the Netherlands in an undercover capacity with a male partner who is now my husband. So things worked out pretty well in that situation.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
My latest book is actually a bit of a departure. It's called Columbus Noir, and it is an anthology of 14 stories, most in the noir style, set in different Columbus neighborhoods. And it's it's published by Akashic Books, which some of you may know publishes a similar series of anthologies set in cities and states around the country and around the world. I just have always appreciated that series and those stories. And I thought, why not Columbus? So very proud of that. Launched it on March 3rd. So I actually did have 2 actual in-person events, and then the rest was history. But yeah, it's a kind of a fun departure from the Private Eye series.
And my latest is The Request, which came out on June 30th. So it was also a pandemic baby. And it's a story about a guy whose old friend shows up and has a request, needs the guy to do something, which turns out to be to get him out of a blackmail situation. And so when the main character goes to try to help him, he stumbles into the middle of a murder, and it just gets crazier from there. So the lesson is, when your old friend comes to town, don't answer the door. Don't.
You might stumble into a murder.
Don't answer the door to anybody right now.
I know. Yep.
All right. Well, thank you all for doing that. That's always important to share about your books. I wonder, I talked a little bit about this earlier, but what other genres do you all enjoy reading when you're, getting inspired to write your books? Do you stick with your genre, or do you read widely?
I read everything. I love to escape. So sometimes I'll read vampire books 1 minute, historical fiction sometimes. I love women's fiction. So anything written in the South. My favorite author of all time is Pat Conroy. So I'll go back and I'll reread all of Conroy's books every couple of years. But I'm all over the place. And then sometimes I'm reading in the mystery and thriller genre. So you never know what I'm going to have with me on my Kindle or in the back of my car. I read everything. I love to read.
We're the same. My nightstand is like 20 books deep. It's just, I keep adding, but because I work a lot with nonfiction clients, nonfiction is, I just read anything and everything I can get my hands on. But I'm the same. I mean, I love poetry and fiction. I read a lot in our genre, but also love women's fiction, because my books kind of straddle the line between suspense and women's fiction. And just, I've been trying to branch out and again, get back to literary fiction, which I love so much and have kind of taken a departure from. So yeah, just anything and everything. I used to not read suspense when I was writing suspense because I didn't want to be influenced. And now I just read everything because there's nothing else to do but read.
Yeah, same as everyone, with slight exception. If I'm not reading mysteries, I might be reading science fiction, but then I read lots of narrative nonfiction, and I'm in a book club. And one of the things I love about the book club is that I don't choose the books. And so the books we read, I probably wouldn't have read normally. And I just love that because it exposes me to such great works that I just, for whatever reason, wouldn't have come across. But yeah, I think it's important to read as widely as possible. And yeah, I can't see not reading in my genre while I'm writing. I guess I don't have that discipline. I love to read too much.
Yeah, I try to read everything, as I've gotten older. I found myself reading more historical fiction that I never really read, but I've enjoyed reading more historical fiction. A while ago, like maybe 10 or 15 years ago, I read a lot of fantasy, and I kind of got away from that. But now, the last few months, I've read some fantasy novels again. So I don't know, you can interpret that I'm looking for escape from this world in some way, shape, or form, right? And also because I teach creative writing at a university, I'm really proficient in reading about the genre of either I murdered my roommate or I woke up drunk and didn't remember how I got here. Like, those two genres are just, I can tell you anything about those genres.
You've got those nailed.
I've got those, yes.
Rea answered this in the chat, but one of our viewers has asked if you guys can recommend any detective or mystery movies or shows that you can watch during quarantine, or podcasts. Andrew, you mentioned podcasts earlier, and that there's a plethora of amazing true crime podcasts, or I think there is. My sister listens, but what do you guys think?
Well, I'll mention two podcasts. One I just finished called the podcast is called Monster, and this was season 3 about the DC sniper, the 2002 shootings around Washington. And then another one I cannot recommend enough is called Bear Brook, and it is about some initially unsolved murders in New Hampshire near the border with Maine. and it involves the use of DNA technology, DNA genealogy tracking. Anyway, just absolutely riveting.
Didn't Unsolved Mysteries just come back? Didn't it just make its comeback? That's supposed to be kind of fun. But yeah, the two that I put down that we'd watched recently are Defending Jacob, which I think was actually a book, and then The Lie, which was really interesting and pretty well done. There's so many more. I'm just like drawing a blank, but
Yeah, I always feel like I'm watching a TV show 10 years after everybody else has been watching it. But we just started watching The OA on Netflix. I don't know if any of you have seen that, but it's a weird combination of like there's some mystery to it because it's about missing people, but there's also kind of like a fantasy sci-fi weird element to it. We're only like 5 episodes in, but it's very good so far. So that's the one we've been watching.
Okay.
I hate anything about the FBI because it's always terrible. But I will say there is one show on Netflix that's excellent for anybody who's interested in the early origins of the behavioral science unit. It's called Mindhunter, and it's based on John Douglas's book, and it's fantastic. And it's a little bit of Hollywood to it, but very little. They stick pretty much to the facts. So if anybody's really interested in the early days of the FBI behavioral science unit, the Mindhunter is great. It's on Netflix. I think there's 2 seasons, and hopefully a 3rd is coming.
Yeah, I started watching that, but I have to temper those serious shows with like The Office, so I keep things a little light.
I've gotten really bad before bed. It's just like my brain, I don't know, this year I'm like, nope, can't take in like violence I don't know. I've really shifted with that. It actually, I feel like it affects my sleep. Maybe it's just older.
Crazy dreams.
Yeah.
David, I have I guess it's historical fiction recommendation. If you haven't read A Gentleman in Moscow yet, It's really great. I know nothing about Russia, and I need to brush up on my history, but it's a great book. So that's a good one. Last question, I think. What are you all reading right now? Obviously, besides each other's books, that you could recommend, or something that you've read recently during quarantine that you really enjoyed.
Well, I'm reading my book club book. I'm in the Pulpwood Queens, so we have a book club book each month, and I'm reading One Good Mama Bone by Brendan McLean. So that's what I'm reading right now.
Yeah, is that good? I've met her, but I didn't get to read her book.
It is good. It's very good. It's sad. I mean, it's a tough read, but it's very well written.
Yeah.
Reading a book that I stumbled upon. It's by Florence Shinn. She was a 1920. She wrote this in 1925, The Game of Life and How to Play It. She was a metaphysicist and so ahead of her time. And I am just geeking out on all of her works. I started with that book. I got the compilation of all of her books, and then I do Book of the Month Club and just got. I'm so blanking on the author's name, but Leave the World Behind. And the writing is so phenomenal. It's I feel like it's literary fiction almost mixed with suspense because his writing is so unusual for this genre. But it's about a couple who leaves New York, gets a cabin with their family as a getaway, and they get a knock on the door in their remote Airbnb with this elderly couple who claims to be the owners of this house. And they say that there's a blackout in New York and they need to stay in the house for the evening. So I always love the Airbnb mystery or murder. I'm like, oh, this is so perfect for that. And I don't know if that's where this is going, but it's so funny and well written, but also suspenseful and just really fresh. It's such a fresh book that kind of melds all the genres together. So I'm really enjoying that one.
I was just consulting my book journal since I have a bad memory. I've kept a book journal since 1998, so it comes in very handy. I would recommend this book called Blacktop Wasteland, which came out this year by S.A. Crosby. It's a debut novel, and it's about a mechanic with a bit of a criminal history in southeastern Virginia who takes on one more job, and it's just good luck putting it down. Really, really, really fresh voice, fresh characters, great action, very well written. Can't recommend it highly enough.
This is probably, since we talked about wanting to escape from reality, this is probably the wrong book, but James Michener wrote a book called The Presidential Lottery, which is about, in 1968, he was an elector in the state of Pennsylvania, and he wrote this book in 1968 saying, we're gambling with our whole system, basing it on the Electoral College. Now, I know that has no bearing on anything that's happening today, but it's kind of fascinating to read that he wrote this book in 1968, and he was an actual elector in Pennsylvania, and it's all about how he got chosen and blah, blah, blah. So
Wow.
if you want to read that before Tuesday, find a copy.
Yeah, I know a lot of people have been reading like Brave New World and 1984. I read 1984 recently, and not that I regret it, but I had to turn to something lighter after that. So anyway, does anyone have any final comments? We're definitely encouraging everyone to go buy your book and support you. And I tell everyone that I know they're getting books for Christmas, which they're used to by now. But anything else before we close up?
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for
joining
being
us.
here. We hope that next year we can do this in person.
What's that? I mean, the virtual events are pretty cool, though. I mean, it's not the same as in person, but yeah, you can be dressed up top, pajamas.
Yeah.
It's great. But I miss the energy of people.
Yeah.
Well, I think a change for the Kentucky Book Fair could be the inclusion of alcohol while the authors sit at their tables.
And pajamas.
Right?
I have been asked, we'll think about that. We'll bring that one to our board and see what they have to say. Maybe a bourbon tasting sometime during the day. I mean, we're Kentucky, right? So it's only fitting. Well, thank you all for being here and sharing about your books and inspiring us. I personally have more books to read now, so thanks to y'all. So thank you all so much for being here, and we hope to see you in person sometime soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks again to our authors for being here tonight, and thank you for watching from wherever you are. You can find links to buy each author's book on josephbeth.com, and you can also find them on kyhumanities.org. Many of the books are available at Joseph Beth's store here in Lexington as well. Find a schedule and registration information for November events starting November 9th at kyhumanities.org. You can register now, or you can wait and see if there's room closer to when the events premiere. If you've participated through Zoom this evening, you'll see a survey pop up on your screen when this window closes, and we hope you'll fill that out just to give us feedback on this event. You can stay up to date by signing up for our newsletter on kyhumanities.org. We send those out about once a week, and be sure to follow us at kyhumanities on social media. Thank you all so much for being here, and we'll see you again in November.